So I want you to picture a very specific, incredibly uncomfortable moment. It's the year 2011.
Okay.
And you're looking at a man who is, arguably one of the most successful bodybuilders, actors, and politicians in modern history. But right now, in this moment, his life is effectively just face down in the mud.
Yeah, it was a really profound fall from grace. I mean, Arnold Schwarzenegger's personal life had just very publicly fractured.
Right.
His time as governor of California was over, and all his post-political projects had just completely collapsed. The media narrative at the time was essentially, drafting the obituary of his career.
Exactly. And I mean, he could have stayed there. A lot of people do when they hit that kind of personal rock bottom, but he didn't. He systematically pulled himself out of it. And we're diving into this today because that imagery of being stuck, of feeling like the walls are closing in, it's just deeply relevant to where a lot of people find themselves right now.
Oh, absolutely.
If we look at the data, the societal landscape is pretty rough.
It is. The scale of the psychological toll is it's staggering, honestly. We've been looking at this study from Boston University, and the researchers found that depression among U.S. adults literally tripled.
Wow. Tripled.
Yeah, between 2018 and the spring of 2020. And the researchers pointed out that this wasn't just like a fleeting mood shift. It was this really pervasive sense of helplessness.
Right.
People are just feeling completely overwhelmed by negativity. They're trapped in the daily grind, and they're unsure of how to regain any sort of agency over their lives.
Which brings us to the mission of our deep dive today. We're pulling from a really fascinating stack of sources. We've got Arnold's own book, Be Useful, 7 Tools for Life, alongside historical biographies, and several clinical studies from places like Stanford and Boston University.
It's a great mix of material.
Yeah. And we are going to unpack the exact psychological and practical toolkit that Arnold used to rebuild his life, which is a framework built entirely on his father's core advice, which was just be useful. So whether you're listening to this because you're prepping for a major career pivot or you're just trying to wire yourself out of a deep rut, we're going to cut through all that generic motivational noise and look at the actual mechanics of how these tools work.
And, the foundation of that entire toolkit really starts with recognizing that you can't climb out of a hole if you have no concept of which way is up.
Right. You need a direction.
Exactly. You must construct a vision. And a vision, if we strip away all the self-help jargon, is really just a clear picture of what you want your reality to look like, paired with a functional blueprint to actually get there.
See, I think a lot of people freeze up at the word vision because they assume it needs to be this fully formed, hyper-detailed master plan from day one.
Oh, for sure.
But Arnold argues that it's completely fine to start with a massive kind of blurry concept. I mean, when he was 10 years old, growing up in post-war Austria, his vision was literally just the word America.
Right, just a broad idea.
Yeah. And Steven Spielberg's another great example from the sources. When he was a kid, his vision wasn't, I'm going to redefine modern cinema and win Academy Awards. His vision was simply to play with an 8mm home movie camera that his dad brought home.
It's so true. You start wide, but and this is key, you cannot stay wide forever.
Yeah.
Eventually, you have to bring that image into sharp focus.
Right.
For Arnold, that really wide vision of America didn't become an actual blueprint until he literally stumbled across a magazine with the British bodybuilder Reg Park on the cover.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Park had used bodybuilding to win Mr. Universe, which then led to him moving to America and starring in those Hercules movies. Suddenly, Arnold had a mechanical blueprint. He saw the exact path.
It's sort of like adjusting the lens on a camera. If you keep a wide-angle lens on, you see this beautiful, broad landscape, but you can't really interact with any of the specific details. It's just a backdrop.
That's a great way to put it.
To actually navigate the terrain, you have to swap to a macro lens and focus on the immediate steps in front of you, or like setting a destination in a GPS. If you just type in California, the GPS gets you there, but you might end up in the middle of a desert.
Right, you have to zoom in to find the exact street.
Exactly. But here is the challenge I see for someone listening to this. If you are just totally exhausted, you're working 50 hours a week and you're dealing with a mountain of responsibilities, how do you practically find the mental bandwidth to swap that lens and visualize your path? Like, where does the time come from?
Well, you have to force a change in your environment. You have to aggressively engineer physical and mental space away from your daily inputs.
Okay, so intentional isolation.
Yeah. Historically, we see a really clear pattern of profound thinkers doing this through the simple physical act of walking. Beethoven, for example, would take these long, solitary walks through the Vienna woods with just blank sheet music.
Oh, wow.
And Aristotle notoriously lectured his students while literally pacing the grounds of the Lyceum.
And we know now from the research that this is not just some romantic historical quirk. Our sources include a 2014 study from Stanford University that looked at the actual mechanics of this. They found that the simple act of walking increases a person's creative thinking output by 100% compared to sitting.
100%. That's massive. And it comes down to how your brain processes stimuli. When you engage in rhythmic, repetitive, physical motion like walking, it requires just enough subconscious attention to sort of tie up your motor cortex.
Right.
This essentially distracts your brain from actively obsessing over your immediate stressors. So when the prefrontal cortex relaxes, your brain engages what neuroscientists call the default mode network.
Okay, what does that do?
It's the network responsible for lateral thinking, daydreaming, and connecting seemingly unrelated ideas. You are physically changing your brain's operating state.
And Arnold's specific method for triggering the state is a little less conventional. He gets into a jacuzzi.
Yes, the jacuzzi.
The sensory deprivation, the constant hum of the jets, the heat of the water, it creates this physical barrier against the outside world. And that is where he does his deep visualization.
Yeah.
In fact, that is exactly where he conceptualized his viral January 6th address to the nation. He was sitting in the jacuzzi, just letting his mind wander, and he visualized the entire production, holding the Conan sword, sitting at his desk, the specific lighting, the whole metaphor of a sword being tempered by fire. It all emerged from that intentionally created mental space.
But, having the vision is really only the first half of the equation. The second half is brutally auditing your current reality to see if you're actually moving toward it. He calls this the mirror test.
A mirror test.
Yeah, you literally look yourself in the eye and assess whether your daily behaviors are actually serving your vision.
And sometimes that mirror test is painful, like really painful. I mean, in 1968, Arnold suffered a devastating loss at a bodybuilding competition in Miami.
Right, to Frank Zane.
Yeah, he was beaten by Frank Zane, who was a competitor that was much smaller, but just far more defined. And Arnold realized he failed the test because his calves were underdeveloped. And calves are, they're incredibly stubborn muscles.
Oh, they're notoriously difficult to grow. They're composed of really dense, slow-twitch muscle fibers. Because, your calves literally carry your body weight all day long. So they're designed for endless endurance, not rapid growth.
So they're used to the abuse.
Exactly. To force them to grow, you have to submit them to extreme, agonizing stimulus. But human nature is to hide our flaws, right? We don't want to look at the things we're bad at because it triggers cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
It physically hurts our ego to admit that our self-image doesn't match reality.
So Arnold bypassed his own ego defense mechanisms in the most literal way possible.
I love this story.
He went home and took scissors to all of his sweatpants and just cut off the lower half. He forced himself to walk around the gym every single day with his greatest physical weakness completely exposed. He couldn't hide from the gap between where he was and his vision.
And once you acknowledge that gap, you face a really critical decision regarding how you're going to bridge it, which introduces this cultural concept. Arnold leans heavily on, it's the German phrase, wenn schon, denn schon.
Wenn schon, denn schon.
Right. And a rough translation is, if you're going to do something, do it. Like, do not hedge your bets. Go all in.
And this principle shows up constantly among people operating at the absolute peak of their fields. Take James Cameron. When he decided to direct Titanic, he wasn't interested in relying on green screens to fake a disaster.
No, not at all.
He wanted the audience to have a visceral, tactile reaction. So he actually authorized the construction of a 775-foot, nearly full-scale replica of the ship.
Built in a custom 17 million gallon water tank.
It's insane.
It was an astronomical financial risk for the studio. But Cameron understood that the tactile reality of freezing water and massive shifting steel that translates to genuine human emotion on screen. He just refused to compromise the integrity of the vision for a safer, cheaper production method.
Arnold applied that exact same all-in mentality when he decided to pivot from being, the biggest action star on the planet to doing a comedy. The studios literally laughed at him.
Right, they thought it was a joke.
They did not want to pay his massive action hero quote for an untested genre. So Arnold, his co-star Danny DeVito, and the director Ivan Reitman made this radical proposal for the movie Twins. They agreed to take $0 up front.
Nothing.
Zero. They forfeited their entire salaries, taking all of the financial risk onto their own shoulders just to force the studio executives to say yes.
Which is the ultimate rejection of what Arnold calls Plan B. He argues that having a backup plan is actually a strategy for failure.
Wait, really?
Yeah, the psychology behind this is super fascinating. When you build a safety net, you alleviate the pressure on yourself. You inherently give the naysayers a voice in your subconscious. So when the friction of your primary goal gets painful, your brain will naturally gravitate toward the path of least resistance, which is your plan B.
Hold on, I need to push back on this a little bit. Because burning your backup plans sounds incredibly reckless.
Sure.
I mean, if James Cameron's massive water tank had structurally failed, or if Twins had bombed at the box office, they would have been in catastrophic trouble. So for a normal person listening to this, someone with a mortgage and responsibilities, how is removing your safety net actually good advice? Isn't it just responsible risk management to have a backup?
I get that. But it requires a fundamental shift in how you evaluate risk. See, most people view risk as the probability of failing at their current level. Arnold views risk in terms of asymmetrical upside.
Okay, asymmetrical upside.
Yeah, if you divide your energy trying to protect a modest, safe reality, the massive transformative goal becomes mathematically impossible. When you remove the safety net, you create an environment of absolute necessity. You force your brain to find solutions because failure is simply no longer an acceptable endpoint.
We actually saw this play out politically in 2005. Arnold introduced a redistricting reform initiative to end gerrymandering in California. And just for context, gerrymandering is a deeply entrenched system that protects incumbents.
Right.
So naturally, he faced ferocious, well-funded opposition from both the political left and the right. Everyone hated it, and his initiative was just crushed at the ballot box.
Right, and in politics, when an initiative fails that spectacularly, the standard operating procedure is to immediately pivot to a safe plan B to save face.
But he didn't. He didn't abandon the vision. He absorbed the defeat, listened to why the voters rejected the specific mechanics of the bill, completely rewrote it, and brought it back to the ballot in 2008.
And he won.
He won by a massive margin. If he had relied on a plan B, the reform would have just died on election night in 2005.
Exactly. But holding on to a vision without a safety net demands a level of execution that most people severely underestimate. A massive vision requires an unbelievable volume of monotonous, unglamorous repetition. The simple, brutal truth of the matter is that work works.
And actually, skipping the work damages us. The sources touch on the phenomenon of sudden wealth syndrome. We constantly see lottery winners who receive, tens of millions of dollars overnight, only to end up completely broke or struggling with profound depression just a few years later.
Yeah, it's really common.
They bypassed the struggle. They never acquired the psychological resilience. They're the financial skills that are forged during the climb.
Right. The repetitive struggle is what builds the capacity to handle the success. We tend to think of genius as this spontaneous thing, but it is almost always the result of obsessive repetition. Like the jazz saxophonist John Coltrane is remembered for this wild, free-flowing improvisational style that critics called sheets of sound. It sounded like pure magic.
But the mechanics behind that magic were incredibly tedious. Coltrane would literally lock himself away and play the exact same note for 10 hours straight just to perfect his embouchure and tone.
10 hours?
Yeah. His wife would walk into the room and find him fast asleep in a chair with the saxophone still securely in his mouth.
And neurologically, what Coltrane was doing was building myelin.
Myelin?
Yeah. Every time you repeat a physical or mental action, your brain wraps a fatty substance called myelin around the neural pathways. The thicker the myelin sheath gets, the faster and more effortless the impulse becomes. So those thousands of hours of boring reps physically wired his brain to perform genius-level improvisation on demand. And building that wiring is deeply uncomfortable.
Because pain is the primary indicator of growth. If you are not uncomfortable, your baseline is not shifting.
Absolutely.
When Arnold was filming Conan the Barbarian, the director John Milius was infamous for pushing his actors way past their breaking points. I mean, he forced Arnold to crawl on his stomach across jagged rocks until his forearms and knees were literally bleeding.
Oh, man.
He even required him to bite into a real dead vulture for a specific shot.
Wait, an actual dead vulture?
Yes. Milius's justification to his actors was chilling but, effective. He told them, pain is temporary, this film will be permanent.
Wow. And that intense physical pain is one form of work, but an equally important form is the mental stamina required for absolute follow-through. It is the refusal to accept bureaucratic dead ends, like in 2007 when massive wildfires swept across Southern California.
Right.
It was an unprecedented logistical nightmare, requiring the evacuation of 500,000 people.
The stakes were literally life and death. Arnold's emergency response team managed to track down a storage unit at Qualcomm Stadium that held hundreds of cots needed for evacuees. But when they got there, they discovered the locks had been changed.
And see, a standard bureaucratic response would be to report the roadblock and just wait for morning.
Right, we tried.
Exactly. But good intentions do not shelter freezing families. Follow-through does. They didn't stop. They stayed up through the night, coordinating logistics while ash was literally falling from the sky. They successfully orchestrated the safe evacuation and relocation of 700 highly vulnerable nursing home residents from Del Mar down to Camp Pendleton, securing ambulances, tracking down hospital beds in the dark.
When people hear stories of that kind of relentless execution, I think the most common defense mechanism is to say, I just don't have the time to do that.
Oh, always.
But Arnold dismantles this excuse by forcing a brutal 24-hour audit.
Yeah, he breaks down the math of a day to remove all illusions. So you sleep for 8 hours.
Right.
You work your primary job for 8 hours. Let's factor in an hour and a half for your daily commute. We allocate 3.5 hours of completely dedicated, uninterrupted family time. And you spend 1 hour exercising.
Okay, so if you add that up, 8 plus 8 plus the commute, family exercise, you arrive at 22 hours.
Leaving you with 2 complete hours of discretionary time every single day. The feeling of busyness is very often a manufactured illusion.
Think about it like a daily expiring grant. Imagine an eccentric billionaire gives you 24 tokens every single morning. You have to spend them all by midnight, and they absolutely do not roll over to the next day.
I like that analogy.
Right. We audit our financial spending obsessively down to the penny, but we let our time tokens vanish without a second thought. If you open your phone settings right now and look at your daily screen time report, you are going to locate those missing 2 hours. The hard question you have to answer is whether you are spending that remaining time constructing your vision or just passively consuming someone else's.
Exactly. So let's assume you do put in the grueling reps. You audit your time, you build the mile in, you do the work in the dark. At some point, you have to bring your vision into the marketplace. You have to sell it to the world. And more importantly, you have to adapt when the world inevitably pushes back.
And selling is a concept that makes a lot of people cringe. I think they associate it with manipulation or being sleazy. How does Arnold's approach make selling feel genuine?
Well, the sources outline a methodology that reframes selling as a genuine act of problem solving. It starts with correctly identifying who holds the actual decision-making power.
Okay.
Arnold learned a masterclass in this as a teenager working in a hardware store in Austria under his boss, Herr Matscher. A married couple walked into the store to buy materials for a bathroom renovation. Herr Matscher naturally began pitching the husband, who was holding the wallet.
Sure.
But he quickly observed that the husband was getting impatient and irritated. He realized the husband had the purchasing power, but the wife had the vision for the bathroom. She was the actual decision maker. So Matscher immediately shifted his entire presentation to address her concerns and solve her specific design problems. Genuine selling is about intense observation.
It is also about controlling the narrative when you face opposition. Arnold's mentor, Jim Lorimer, taught him a media training technique called bridging.
Bridging, yes.
When someone hits you with a hostile question designed to trap you, you briefly acknowledge their premise, and then you immediately pivot the conversation to the topic you actually want to discuss.
It is a form of verbal judo. During the incredibly chaotic 2003 California gubernatorial debate, Arnold's opponents continuously tried to bait him. They wanted to frame him as this clueless, muscle-bound actor who had no business on a political stage.
Right.
If he had gotten defensive, he would have validated their frame. Instead, he used bridging. He accepted their premise with a joke to disarm the tension, established common ground with the audience, and then seamlessly bridged his answer into a detailed breakdown of his policy points and leadership experience. He asserted his competence by simply refusing to play their game.
But even with masterful selling, things will occasionally go catastrophically wrong. The key differentiator between those who succeed and those who fail is how they shift gears. Complaining is just a mechanism that outsources your locus of control to external circumstances.
Exactly. Look at Arnold's medical crisis in 2018. He checked into the hospital for a routine, minimally invasive heart procedure. He woke up to the news that the surgeons had accidentally punctured his heart wall, resulting in massive internal bleeding.
Oh my God.
They had to crack his chest open for emergency open heart surgery. And this happened just weeks before he was scheduled to be on set to film Terminator: Dark Fate.
The natural reaction for almost anyone would be anger, lawsuits, bitterness, just complaining about the sheer bad luck of it all.
But complaining wouldn't heal his sternum. So he shifted gears. He took total ownership of his recovery. He actually had his team bring a whiteboard into the intensive care unit. He drew tally marks for every breathing exercise he completed to prevent pneumonia. He marked down every lap he walked around the nurse's station with his walker.
That's incredible.
He approached his rehabilitation with the exact same clinical intensity he used to prep for a movie role, and he walked out of the hospital well ahead of schedule.
And that internal locus of control extends to owning your public failures too. Going back to that disastrous 2005 special election, when his initiatives failed, he didn't send out a spokesperson to spin the results. He called a massive press conference, stepped up to the microphone, and took 100% of the blame.
He really did.
He looked at the cameras and said, "I failed, I heard the voters, and I was wrong."
Because radical accountability completely disarms critics. When you own the failure plainly, you deprive the media of a scandal.
What?
Once he cleared the air, he was able to shift gears, reach across the political aisle, and pass enormous pieces of legislation.
Right, including historic environmental bills like the Million Solar Roofs Initiative.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That accountability was so effective that he won re-election in a landslide the following year.
But to maintain that level of adaptability, to know when to pivot, how to sell, and how to recover from public failure, you cannot operate in a vacuum. You cannot rely solely on your own intellect. You must become an absolute sponge for the knowledge of the people around you.
It requires a profound level of humility. We looked at quotes from both the Dalai Lama and Ernest Hemingway in the source material, and they both articulate the exact same truth. When you are speaking, you are merely echoing information you already possess. It is only through the act of deep listening that you can acquire new data.
If you treat the world as a classroom, you don't necessarily need traditional credentials to build an empire. The sources highlight the story of Mary Shanuda. She dropped out of high school in the 11th grade because she was suffering from debilitating, unexplained dietary illnesses.
Yeah.
But instead of accepting a lifetime of chronic pain, she took ownership of her situation. She taught herself to navigate complex medical journals, sought out experts, and became a relentless sponge for gastroenterology and nutrition data. She eventually cured her own illnesses and leveraged that hard-won knowledge to build a massive business as the paleo chef, advising elite professional athletes.
Curiosity is what draws high-level people toward you. Arnold experienced a pivotal moment of this early in his Hollywood career, during a lunch meeting with the director James Cameron for the Terminator.
Okay, what happened there?
Well, Arnold walked into that restaurant operating under the assumption that he would play the hero, Kyle Reese. Because in Hollywood, leading men play heroes, villains are secondary.
Right.
But instead of dictating terms, he sat back, asked questions, and really listened as Cameron explained his vision for the cyborg. He absorbed Cameron's perspective on the mechanics of the machine, how it would move, how it would operate without any human empathy. By keeping his ego in check and his mind open, Arnold realized the villain was actually the star of the film.
Wow.
He took the role of the Terminator, which catapulted him from a niche action star to a global cinematic icon.
And he carried that exact same sponge mentality into the governor's office. He knew he wasn't a career politician, so he actively sought out the frontline workers who understood the actual mechanics of the state. He didn't just sit there and read executive summaries about infrastructure. He went out and listened to the civil engineers explaining the structural vulnerabilities of the crumbling levee systems.
Right.
He went to the hospitals and listened directly to the floor nurses. Nurses explain exactly why the mandated nurse-to-patient ratios were leaving them dangerously exhausted. But I have to ask, it is relatively easy to be an open-minded sponge when you are young, hungry, and trying to prove yourself. How do we prevent our minds from calcifying into what the sources call brittle bricks as we age and acquire our own expertise?
That's the danger, right? The human brain loves efficiency, and relying on past expertise is highly efficient. To combat that, you have to actively force yourself into environments where you are the novice. You have to intentionally surround yourself with people who know vastly more about a subject than you do, and you have to prioritize your own curiosity over your desire to appear competent. If you stop absorbing new inputs, your vision stagnates and you become obsolete.
So let's pull all of this together. If you find yourself face down in the mud, the architecture for getting out is clear. You start by adjusting your lens, finding a clear vision of your destination. You burn your backup plans so that failure is no longer a viable option. You embrace the agonizing, monotonous repetitions that build the myelin and give you the skills to execute. You observe intensely, bridge through the pushback, and sell your reality while taking radical ownership of your missteps. And above all, you keep your ego in check and remain a sponge for the expertise of others.
Which brings us to a final underlying question about the nature of ambition itself. Suppose you apply this toolkit. You audit your time, you endure the pain, you take the asymmetrical risks, and you actually achieve the massive vision you set out for yourself. What are you supposed to do next?
It makes me think of Sir Edmund Hillary. When he and Tenzing Norgay became the first human beings in recorded history to successfully summit Mount Everest, he didn't, plant his flag, sit down in the snow, and decide his life's work was complete.
No.
The moment he stood at the highest elevation on the planet, he looked out across the horizon, spotted another unclimbed peak in the Himalayas, and immediately began analyzing the topography to plot his next route.
Because the goal was never just to stand on one specific piece of rock. The goal was the climb itself.
So as you audit your own 24 hours today, recognize that the tools we've discussed are not simply a ladder designed to get you out of a temporary rut. They are the components of an engine, and that engine is designed to keep you climbing, to help you discover new peaks, and to ensure that you remain relentlessly useful for the rest of your life. Keep climbing.